You want to hear? Right, thank you everyone for coming. Do steps training. This is our annual steps refresher. This is supposed to be over a series of hours, but we tried to condense it based on phase already. Therapeutic approach to behaviour training, which is the beginning of the year. There's a lot of things that overlap. We also don't want to teach you to suck eggs, and so we want to make sure the message is still clear and that we're all following the same protocol. This is important. By the end of this, because you're here and you've had the training, you'll get a certificate saying you are steps trained. For those of you who don't know, Faye and I are steps trained tutors, so we go to refresher meetings and we go to find out the latest version updates, and then we are there to feed them back to you. Steps is currently in the process of changing towards the therapeutic approach to behaviour, which may also change later on because there's a lot of people that are now leaving steps and branching out and doing their own different things. So you may have heard of someone called Adam Hayes. Adam Hayes has set up his own therapeutic thinking, which is under this umbrella here. He's like the steps guru. He introduced steps into primary schools in Hertfordshire, and they're in many schools now. So this is very what happens in most schools in Hertfordshire in terms of behaviour.
So we're not a step school anymore, we're a therapeutic thinking school.
Therapeutic thinking school.
Slips off the tongue. Should we watch this? Do you think the sound is?
Yes, sound should be working. So I'm just going to play you a video clip just quickly. Just you may have seen this before. Hopefully it works.
It's called Why I Am Rude.
I'm rude because I like the feeling of power and control it gives me, especially as I often feel very out of control on the inside. I am rude because it gives me an outlet for all my pent-up emotions that I struggle to identify.
I'm rude because people in my past spoke to me with each other that way, and I'm used to it.
I am rude because it gives me attention, even if it's negative attention. I am rude because I know it winds you up, and I like to feel in control of you, so I don't feel as scared.
I am rude because I'm tired, hungry, thirsty, or just want to cuddle, but don't realise I'm feeling these things.
I am rude because I've got heightened levels of cortisol in my body, which pushes me into fight, flight, or freeze.
I am rude because you've done something nice with me or for me, and I want to remind you that I'm a bad kid.
That's because on the inside, I'm filled with shame, and I have a negative internal working model. I don't believe I deserve good or nice things, so I sabotage everything. I'm rude because I want to elicit the same response from you that I received from either my previous or birth family. It feels comfortable when you behave in a way that I expect, even though it's not good for me, and just proves that I'm right and that all adults are the same.
I am rude because you've got too close, and I'm scared of attachment. I'm ready to push you away and reject you before you reject me.
I am rude because I'm perceiving a threat when there is none. This is called faulty neuroception.
I am rude because I can't think before I behave in a certain way or say the wrong thing. I have no internal inhibitors.
I'm rude because my higher brain is underdeveloped and offline. I'm rude because that's the label I've been given by everyone else, so I might as well live up to it.
Finally, I'm mostly rude because I'm scared.
Very quiet. Yeah, so there's lots of different reasons for behaviour. As we know, behaviour is a form of communication. So these are the main changes since the last time we did the steps training. Like we've already said, it's now going to be called therapeutic thinking. There's no longer a roots and fruits tree. It's called the therapeutic tree. There's a theme here. There's been an update to the emotional wellbeing and behaviour strategy, which we knew about. So Ben was already tweaking the behaviour policy. We've taken lots of that That's from Herts Council. They've written that, taken lots of the developmental markers from there and put that in our policy. We've updated our behaviour policy. This document here called Behaviour in Schools was updated in September 22. So again, that's fed into the emotional wellbeing and behaviour strategy, which subsequently is now in our policy. And this is much more, this is Department for Education, so there's things linked to practice, linked to law, basically, in there that we must follow. Lots more talk about emotional literacy. It's a term that we're using much more, but there's a bit of description about really what that actually is. Looking more at behaviour as a developmental thing rather than you're this old, so you should behave this way, or you could be 8 but still have 2-year-old behaviours, that sort of thing. And then we've been working on aligning our document with the therapeutic approach, so the training that I delivered earlier in the year, which is really tailored at early years practice, but actually we think it's really fitting for lots of children in all our year groups. So they're the main changes.
So over this past year, spent a lot of time looking at all of the documents, all of the guidance that's come out since the start of this year and the end of last academic year, and just looking at our behaviour policy, what's working well, what's not, and just sort of meeting the needs of the children that we have in our current cohort. This has been an ongoing review that SLT have been looking at across the year, just to see actually, do we have everything in there in terms of where our children are, what are the developmental issues that are coming up, what are we noticing in terms of behaviour changes across the school, and what are we doing about it. So with that in mind, this is something that has been looking at our stages of behaviour, our pathway in terms of who gets involved, when they get involved, and why people get involved, and what happens next. It's important for you to know the pathway, the stages. I'll have a copy of this in everyone's classroom by tomorrow morning, and it'll be laminated for you to place up. It's just a more visual, it's much easier, hopefully, to see where we start, and then we move round into our pathway, so you can see. So the first stage in terms of classroom behaviour, a verbal reminder to children up to 3 times. So we're looking at that's our stage 1. So we're doing the original stage 1, a reminder, a verbal warning of what you're expecting to see, really focusing on those pro-social behaviours, oxygenising those children that are showing those pro-social behaviours and saying, oh, I can see so-and-so, so really, thank you so much, that's great. Oh, and hopefully that will then have a domino effect on the rest of the class, and it saves you from focusing on that negative social behaviour. We're then going to go to 5 minutes thinking time. This is because we are an infant school, we're early years minded. I think it's important to have that thinking time and have a space to go to, a mindfulness area, which is available to every child in our school. I think we need to think about those children, particularly at play times and possibly in the dining room. So breakfast club, for example, thinking of ways we can develop that into our breakfast club for particular children, which will have a designated space for them to go to. So we're looking at that at the moment. And then it's the interaction. This is where the learning comes from, and more of the interaction with the staff, trying to find out what the problem is. Not putting feelings, not telling them I can see that you are frustrated, but you have a feeling, a conversation around trying to work out what's going on. Because often we all know that, as Faye's already said, behaviour is a communication of someone trying to communicate something to us. We've got to try and find out what that is. If that isn't happening, it's not working, then the class teacher will be meeting with parents, and then the steps process will start. That's when me and Faye will come in. We've got a series of things that we will go through for particular children to focus on, and we'll call that stage 2. After that, we'll have meetings with myself and parents. I'm happy to get involved in those conversations with you, so then we can talk about the behaviours we've seen, how persistent they are, when it's happening, and with the steps intervention here, we're then start to look for patterns, look for triggers, and figure out what it is we can do to try and stop that from happening, getting there, being proactive rather than being reactive. Then we may be looking at a weekly behaviour report. At the moment, we're trying to look at what that's going to look like. That will probably be a verbal between us and you, just to make sure that we're all on the same lines of communication, because often if behaviour things come to me, I need to know what's happening on your end, because you may see things different to what I see. I'm not there on the shop floor, and likewise Faye. And then after that, if it's got to that point and it's not working, then we'll put together a risk reduction plan. So hopefully that makes things a little bit clearer for everybody, and we'll see how this goes. This is ongoing. This is something that we're going to work on, because we know that things will hopefully work one way. If it doesn't work, we have to make a change. So that should work.
Can I just clarify? So when we get to the red box,
Yep.
stage 2,
Yep.
we don't go to the stage 3 if after the meeting things calm down.
Yes.
We do directly go to that box as well.
We keep it in the box. So if it's meeting that expectation there, we don't touch it. We're mindful of it and track that. And I think this is where CPOMs is really important.
Carry on, we go to stage 3 and then
Yeah.
go across to the next one,
Yeah,
the next
but
one.
just trying to keep a clear pathway as to what happens, so then you know. So then you're not getting to the point where I can't physically cope at the moment. I'm going to take them to me or take them to myself. We've got to follow these steps. This is what the behaviour policy is all about, making sure that we're keeping our children in our classrooms as much as we can. What can we do to try and help that and make that happen and make it manageable?
Before you laminate it, there's a spelling mistake there.
Oh, yeah, there is.
Are we going to call it therapeutic thinking process?
We all call it the therapeutic thinking because I've done this before. Yes, thank you. Critical Fred. That's what we like, Critical Fred.
Ignore that on the recording.
And thank you, that's helpful. And then this will be underneath. So this will be an A4 piece. So you've got this on top and then you have this on the bottom, which just pretty much explains what I just said.
Does the you said it goes to the they go to the mindful area?
Yeah.
Do they have to go to the mindful?
They don't have to go to the mindfulness area. It's just we know that that's a safe space in our
I don't want
classrooms.
it to be labelled as like that's where they go to. We tried to come away from that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the strategies. That's what all children should be able to do during that quiet time.
Yeah.
But it's just it maybe if you need to send them to an area,
Yeah.
Yeah. Not to like.
you have to go there because you just make them. No.
Mhm.
So, obviously, like, if there was itching or biting, can be done. Presumably like that, doesn't happen like 3
We're going to
times.
talk about biting.
We
later.
are. Yeah, we'll come on to that.
Seems like slightly more extreme.
Yep. Okay, so in a moment we're going to talk about give you some scenarios based on what we've seen, what we're hearing, and then we're going to make those links to our behaviour policy to make sure to make sure that we are in line with our behaviour policy, because that's what it's there for. We have to make sure we are tight, we know how it works, we know the interventions and what we need to do. So in terms of consequences, this is something that we're going to discuss in depth in a moment. So this is taken from the behaviour in schools, and these are the acceptable forms of sanctions or consequences that we're calling. So if we're looking at a verbal reprimand, a reminder of expectations of behaviour, that's in line with our pathway of our behaviour policy. The setting of written tasks, taking account of their behaviour. So that is something that you do those reflection forms. Previously, you did have a reflection sheet to fill in. We took that away because actually it depends on the child, if it's purposeful for that particular moment, because that's taking you away from the rest of the children. We want you to be with the children, not necessarily working with the child who's showing that antisocial behaviour. There'll be loss of privileges, which I think we're quite good at looking at, as long as it's purposeful. The most important thing to think about consequence is it links to the behaviour that the child has shown. We'll come on to those in a moment. Detention doesn't apply to us. So what we then do here is we have moments where there are periods of time where children will have to do a consequence based on what that is. It will be the next available time. Most likely playtime for Key Stage 1 and lunchtime. If it has to be that time, it has to be that time. It's called an in-class community service, which is the next one. So we talk about that really, really carefully, because it could be, if it's a tidying in the classroom, they need to be in the classroom, and it's got to be during their time, because you don't want to stop them from doing their learning. So that's really, really important. Regular reporting, including early morning reporting. We haven't got a report as such, but we're monitoring that behaviour. We'd obviously report our things in CPOMs, and then that's when Melissa and I will evaluate, summarise, reflect and review our CPOMs regularly, see where the children are. Is there an improvement? If there's not, we'll ask you what we're going to be doing next. And then suspension, etc. Serious circumstances, we're looking at permanent exclusion.
Right, so there's two different types of consequences. There's the protective consequences. I'm glad this has come to me. So we just sat there and we go, what's the difference? And educational consequences. So protective consequences, removal of a freedom to manage harm. So we're talking about, oh, that's on the next slide. I won't read that bit. And educational consequences, the learning, rehearsing or teaching, so the freedom can be returned. Clear?
No. This will make it clearer.
So, that's the same slide here, isn't it? So, protective consequences are necessary measures to from dangerous behaviours. So we were thinking like throwing chairs. You have to put a protective consequence in place, which might be that you remove that chair and that child doesn't have one, or you remove the children in the class because they're at risk of harm from the flying chair. When we use protective consequences, we need evidence of the educational consequences that are in place to progress the child to a point where we can return any freedoms limited by the use of protective consequences. Educational consequences return freedoms.
Yeah, so
There was examples. Click twice there.
I think twice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did. One more. Yeah, so the protective consequences could be you've got more staff in the room, you limit how much space they have access to outside because they can't cope with that. You have to go with them to the toilet or with them to the playground. Restrict their off-site activities. So they might not always be able to go, or there might be conditions to that. Differentiated teaching space, a few of those, different resources. And then educational consequences is about the learning the relevance of and completing tasks, rehearsing and practicing the behaviour expectations, assisting with or planning for repairs. That might be, we've had a bit of that, haven't we, this year, helping Mr. Reed. Educational opportunities to increase their understanding, researching the implications of their behaviour, conversation and exploration. That's more like learning about why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other one's more physical. That's still quite complicated.
So this is a really important part. So restorative debrief is something that I think we do quite well here in terms of investigating, finding out where this behaviour is coming from, having those conversations with children, using our de-escalation script, which is on our lanyards as well, having those conversations to find out what is going on without being, just being that person there to listen to them and advise them, because we know that we spend a lot of time in terms of develop our children as learners. We also need to develop their behaviour as well. We play an important part in that and get them ready to be global citizens. And when they leave here, we want them to know that they're going to be in a safe space. They've learned how to behave, look at the pro-social behaviours, and that's what we're expecting them to be able to do, setting them up for the rest of their life. So having those conversations is extremely important with our children. A nice quote from Professor George White: approach to inappropriate behaviour, which puts repairing harm done to relationships and people over and above the need for assigning blame and dispensing punishment. So the objective of a restorative debrief is to focus on what behaviour the children have done. It's really focusing on that. Identifying how it can be repaired, looking at the experiences and feelings and needs of everybody involved, and plan to secure conflict, which is less likely to happen in the future. So we're trying to think about what are the trigger points, how we can help that child to de-escalate and not get to that point before it's too late. So if we've got someone who's throwing chairs, we try and work out what it is that's stopping, that's making them behave like that. What are they seeking? And then we try and put things in place to make sure that we try and eliminate that.
This is like replacing the reflection sheet, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just doing it in a more verbal way.
Which I think we're quite good at doing. I think everyone's quite good at having those conversations with children, just sitting down, trying to work out, obviously at the most appropriate time, not immediately after, because you know that could be really heightened. So it's choosing that appropriate time for that to happen. It's really important that we do. When we record that on CPOMs, it's also vitally important that we record down what has been said. So if we're looking at our CPOMs log or incident, often the action will be, or have a conversation with a child, or have a conversation with parents. What's really important is that you close that loop. What was that conversation? What was had? Because then Melissa and I can see, actually, this was the incident, this was what we've done about it, and this is a result of what's happened. And hopefully that should then stop the behaviour from happening in the future. If it doesn't, then we'll just keep adding actions to try and stop it from happening and have more work in terms of steps. But I think generally we're quite good at the debriefs and making sure it's the most appropriate time and recognising that. Everyone is great at recognising it at the best time and when's not the best time. So being curious, really that's what we're doing. We're being curious. We're not trying to be judgmental. We're not putting words into children's mouths, trying to tune into how they're feeling, what are their wants, their needs, exploring the context. Who else was there? Can they give you a clearer picture of what happened? We're looking at the situations, any relationships. anything that led to a reaction from that child. Can you make sense of what you see? What's the function of behaviour? And noticing how the changes in subtle behaviour communicates their feelings and needs, and look for ways to engage in the positive. And hopefully that will then, if you think about the positive, so you're then saying to them, so if we do this, this would help you, hopefully help you feel better about the situation. Let's have those conversations. And trying to just explore really what happened. And I think looking at the detailing that we have in CPOMs is very good in terms of we can never under describe what's going on. And we can never over describe. I think everyone's clear in terms of what's happened. And you can see that in some of the descriptions that we've got. Being accurate, being non-judgmental, which we're also good at. Thinking about what they've done before and after the incident, who's affected, consider how they can repair those incidents. So it could be at a point where they're thinking, after all that with this person, I don't know how to make that better. That's when we can make that better. We can be that person, that link between the 2 children, 3 children, to help them restore that friendship and repair the damage. So just examples of some debriefing questions. What would you like to happen next? How can we make things better for you? How can we help you put this right? How can we make it okay for you to go back into class? What do you think others might need? Now, this is obviously dependent on the child, who you can have those interactions with, and that's about you knowing the children and how to do that. Without getting right into the math.
Ben, can I ask? We've got these little prompts on the back, should we help? They would be really helpful to have
As an extra. We could do that. It's like maybe some Colbert, they'd like a registration plate on there. If that's helpful, we can get them out. We can put on the back of that.
No, there's something on the back.
There is something on the back, isn't it?
We'll have to do another one. These are quite nice. Because I was also thinking of a little boy we had at school with us last year that isn't with us now, who we couldn't do a restorative thing with because it just started the whole cycle up again. So this is for the majority of children, not all. But these are good ways of doing it for the particularly young.
It's like the commentary conversation. It's really easy to do. You're just drawing stick people and you're just having big speech bubbles. So you don't actually say anything. You just draw a picture of a person, you, talking to them, but you write it in a speech bubble. It's a really powerful way to do it. Some children just enjoy it, some children don't.
Gosh.
That's old school, still.
Really
It's like PSHE.
Gosh. That's an old, when we used to teach PSHE. I think it was a scheme that we used, but they're probably looking around in some schools, but I don't think they're here.
Must be if it still is from January.
Case study things to do.
And we can help you with a therapeutic treat, which we won't go into today because it takes a lot of time.
Signing or signalling. Karen!
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we'll give you some scenarios. So we're going to talk about, give you an example, and then we're going to think about the most appropriate consequence you think would be the best way forward for this particular. So for an example, child tips over a learning toolkit, emptying the entire toolkit on the floor. A consequence could be stay inside of the classroom, the mess they have made. Again, it depends on the child, depends on how much of a mess they've made. It might also involve you making that first step and say, come on, give me a hand, we can do this together. Because obviously they've made a huge mess and they won't go through that in 4 minutes. There are also different concepts you might need to think about. So the whole point of this is for you to have a discussion. What else might you need to think about for each scenario? So here's an example. A child has torn up a piece of work that's been given to them. They have not completed the work and is distracting other children in the class. What do you do? These are real life examples. I'm trying to think of what you have seen and the information that we've been given. So you might never know some of these. So they can be prepared for school. So on your table, have a discussion. Yeah.
What's this?
No.
Gosh, I can't do this, Ben. Up in the air.
Took them off.
Seven.
Six. Five, I've got.
Yep. Okay, what do you think? Consequences? Any questions? Yep. Okay, how would you approach that?
How can I help you? Yeah. I don't know, it depends. Like in some ways you just want to give them a sheet, and you don't have any sheets.
So I think Miss Honor is working out the context.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, well done.
Well done.
Thing. When you find out more of the idea, the why, what now? What do we do at Maryhill after that?
Are they going along with it or are they fighting? Then there's two options.
Okay, so let's say they're going along with it.
Prepare together, like sellotape or go to the photo sphere together, piece it back together.
And some of the deputies.
Yeah.
Okay, and if they're heightened, what would you do then?
Come back and maybe kind of way of fixing it. We're talking about it online.
There's no right or wrong way. It depends. It obviously depends on your experiences as well, and depends. You're thinking about your children in your class and what you would do. Sometimes what I think is it's frustrating as a teacher. You think, oh, I've only got 30 of these. I think sometimes bear in mind those children and think, just do a few more, just in case, just because it's easier. And obviously, like Katie said, you don't want to be giving them new ones because you know if it's going to keep happening.
Have anyone with you to
Exactly.
to tell us
Yeah.
how it goes to photocopy, yeah?
And I think you've got to look at the bigger picture. I think actually, yeah, they're ripping paper up, but they could be doing something else rather than ripping paper. They could be kicking, throwing chairs. In the grand scheme of things, it's not actually that big of a deal. It's a difficult behaviour. It's not dangerous. It's difficult. But I think it's just making sure that we're keeping ourselves in check, thinking this bit of paper, have a few extra bits. Obviously, depending on who it is, and if they're ripping it up, then make that judgment.
Depends on the pieces, because the two pieces you can quite easily stick
Yep.
that together.
Yep.
It's like 20.
Yep.
They might just give a task like really expand.
Yep.
They might not understand like really it's difficult. So you might consider simplifying it. Because they might, yeah. The people that can't do it.
Perfectionism, wanting to make mistakes. And actually they're never going to get like 20 sheets. It's still going to be saying we try that.
It's 20 sheets like maybe 10 and you just the need to say to you that individual, you can calm down and you come back and you apologize, isn't it? And you start over again. So I guess, like you said, it depends on what child you're dealing with. How many papers you're going to give out to that one child and leave it, and you probably do a different task and then come back to it.
Yeah, and we are talking about the majority of the children, but if they've got an additional need, they might need something different. So this policy is the majority, but there are children who policy needs adjusting. for.
Absolutely.
So I think that's one of the children.
This is better because you're thinking of different things. You're thinking about it from a different perspective, and this is what this conversation is about. It's what would you do? You need to have information to hand. You would obviously do things different because you're thinking of different children in your mind, which is great.
Thinking doesn't necessarily mean they're making an social
No.
in the context of the time. So
It is, yep. A lot of this think context. Okay, next scenario. We'll just shout it out from here. A child has come into the classroom angry, they come in and flip chairs over. What do you do? Yeah. If you've got too many chairs, you've got 30 chairs, and you can't manage that on your own. It's the afternoon, you're on your own.
Take the class out and have that child in and call for assistance. Because you have to safeguard the other children. At least if it's just one child in the classroom and you're standing by the door and have your class lined up in the classroom, which Lauren had it yesterday, and then she popped her head down, I went in, just stood with that child from a distance and talked.
Difficult or dangerous behaviour? Yeah, I think it's dangerous no matter who's in the classroom. If you have children in the classroom, if you don't have children in the classroom, it's dangerous for anybody to be throwing chairs. That's completely opposite of what we're looking for in terms of antisocial behaviour. But it's a real life situation.
I find it much better, but like I say, I'm here in order to short, actually like to get on with their own chairs.
if it's
You
something
know,
that
that's
they
the
do,
danger, but you just need to get it out.
Yep.
you can give them an alternative if you know that when they are heightened, like if it's happening at a certain time of the day, come and play them or something, from that therapeutic approach to behaviour, to give them something they can throw somewhere that isn't going to hurt them, like a beanbag.
Yeah.
Just try and give them, if that's what they need.
It's just those reminders, self-image reminders. You know, we don't throw chairs. We know we don't throw chairs, but we've learned that we don't throw chairs. Obviously, children that are working at different developmental stage, they don't understand that. So, like I was saying, throwing balls, we throw beanbags. And that's something that, that's a real life example that I worked on with someone, and actually, since then, there's been another incident. So actually, it hasn't worked. So then we need to make adjustments as to what it is. But it's having those conversations with that child at a relevant time. Try and work out what it is. Could be anything. Stomachache, bad night's sleep. Just trying to work out what it is and trying to be proactive and stop it from happening. But it's right, get the children out. If it's safe enough to do so, get that child out if you can, which we'll talk about in terms of physical a little bit later. Let's go to the next one. Okay. Oh, and child. A child with SEN is crying because someone has said unkind things to them and called them stupid.
The other child and ask what they said. I might have been before the child was crying when I started it. Yeah, get close to silence.
What's the most important part of this? This context. What's the most important part of this scenario? I'm thinking, which child?
The child is
With what need? They're the most vulnerable children. Or
There's
SEN
new data about the percentage of bullying that is and the nutrition condition needs in schools. And I think they're just so much more vulnerable. I mean, today a child said to me, "Oh, they're so and so saying rude things to me," and if you press them, it's very difficult to actually get this, oh so rude statement out to the children. So that's open to interpretation. That this is an actual. They called them stupid. The unkind things is hard to actually get, especially for a child with communication difficulty. But if they're saying words like stupid, so what do we do?
You have to reassure the same child the next student. Dealing with my own child. Retard, stupid, handy, those are the words that come out of children's name, and usually they don't really know what the word is at a younger age. So you have to reassure, because if that same child starts to build in their head that they are, it brings out other behaviours as well.
So I think that's important. You need to definitely go and speak to the child who is upset. That's almost, there's two separate situations here. It's on a chair and the inanimate object. That's very important. How do we deal with the children that have been unkind or stupid?
Maybe have like group session as well to remind all of them that these kind words and actions.
Because I remember in reception, stupid swear word apparently. They said yes for a long time.
Yeah.
That's important.
Because you've been tackling with some serious incidents through Assembly, haven't you?
Yeah.
I think that is important to do that as well. But it does need to be directly addressed so that it is very clear that this is not what we do. Whatever the child is, we don't call anybody these names, but if they're aware of the difference as well, and then they've chosen to target that child because they are different, it's different again. So
It's really unfortunate, depending on the situation, you might talk to actually the young child's parents, because they might go home, but also you might talk to the child. So,
even what's worse is they don't go home and say it,
yeah.
and this is, oh, this is just what happens to me. Like that video at the beginning, called rude, I am rude, so I'm going to be rude. So I think we really, it's can worms,
Yeah.
but we actually have to go in there.
And it's most important that actually whatever we do as a result of this gets recorded. It has to be recorded. I know it can be an onerous task, but this is so important because you're seeing it firsthand, and we need to understand what's going on, so then we can put parameters in place, we can put things in place, we can deliver assemblies, we can do small social groups. We've got the capacity to do it, but it's making sure that we all know what's going on and just log everything, so then we can then see actually what's the problem here and look at the patterns. Because you won't necessarily see those patterns. So it's very important that we're all part of that process. One more, should we carry on?
Just carry on.
Carry on. Okay. Get that?
Yeah, there's some slides we have to click through, like these.
Get that.
You've seen these before. It's basically all of these areas are intertwined. It doesn't work without each of those areas, but at the heart of that is the culture of the school. And actually, Miss and I were talking about this earlier, and we feel like we've kind of really been away in the last year in terms of just like the inclusiveness of the school and just how all of you are approaching difficult behaviours, and just how we are talking or not talking about it, so much, just the language that we're using and everything. So I really feel like the culture is embedded. So well done. It's really great.
Okay, so do you want to take this one?
No.
So we're looking at factors such as wealth and education and deprivation and privilege. And there's a definition between therapeutic deprivation and therapeutically privileged. So those children who are feeling isolated, powerless, who are burdened, they're judged, they feel rejected, as opposed to those who are privileged, who are feeling safe, loved, inspired, and motivated and considered. Just looking at those affected by antisocial feelings and thinking about those children who deserve help. Every child deserves help. Every child is entitled to education. Every child is entitled to be treated the same way, despite privilege, despite deprivation. And we know that that's prime in terms of Ofsted's agenda, looking at our vulnerable children, looking at our SEN children, and making sure that they have a voice. What's it like here to be an SEN child? So I think we've got a very clear understanding of what that is like, but it's giving everyone's entitled for everyone.
Right, so this is a bit I have to really concentrate. So, do you know what the difference is between feelings and emotions? Because when I did this training, I kind of thought that they were
Like inside of emotions.
yeah, it's very
That's the one thing.
yeah. You're not far
Yeah,
off.
then worry angry.
So, feelings originate in the neocortical region of the brain, and they are reactions to the emotional stimulus. So emotions happen pre-birth. Babies have emotions. This is something that we're really focusing on since COVID. There it is again. These form when your brain assigns a meaning to the emotional experience that you are having. So we're really looking at the importance emotional literacy plays in creating pro-social experiences and feelings. So they're separate things, but they work together. Yeah, this is where it gets
Yeah,
complicated.
it does.
We're not going into this in massive detail because we did quite a bit on it on our training, but we're going to really focus on emotional literacy, aren't we?
Yeah.
Because the other stuff is just too much.
Yeah. So emotional vocabulary, the language necessary to describe your own feelings and to understand the feelings of others, and emotional literacy, the ability to read or recognize your own emotions and feelings and read or recognize feelings in others. That's the difference between the literacy and vocabulary. This is, I think, the hardest, especially for our younger children, to understand feelings of other people and how their behavior affects them and what to look for, what other things that you look for in terms of people showing their cross, because we all show different feelings in different ways, don't we? I think that's sometimes even harder. And we know that actually since COVID, our children haven't necessarily got like a learning issue in terms of reception, haven't missed out on learning opportunities because they were still young at that point. What we do know is those children have missed out on more interactions with wider people in their family because they couldn't do it. It's only with their immediate family. So they're probably more familiar with your immediate family, but with your wider community, they're not necessarily there with them at the moment. So that's where we play quite a heavy part on that. That's why delivery of jigsaw lessons is important, and our focus for assemblies, just building up those characters and getting children to understand how their feelings affect other people. We don't all show our feelings in the same way. And also we don't, our toolkits for our zones of regulation don't always fit everyone. You know, we don't, when we get angry, we don't all go for a run, because that's not how we focus. Focus is different. That's okay. And same as children, it's okay to feel like that.
So there are 6 types of basic emotion. We were obviously asked to think what they were. Disgust isn't one that I thought of. I was going, well, happy, sad, excited. We got jealous, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
One of the therapeutic thinking nitpicks at the moment is that zones of regulation is very much pigeonholing emotions into these 4 main colours zones. And that really children shouldn't be going to school and thinking that emotions are, there are just 6 of them. There's no reason why they shouldn't be leaving us having an emotional vocabulary of 100 or more words. So that's why we've been saying, try to avoid saying the children feel like a colour, and try and put stuff on by zones of regulation to try and model use more vocabulary than just these main 6, or just the 4 that we have. And it's taught, the emotional literacy is taught through 4 main pillars. This is what the research is based on. So pillar 1, continual growth of emotional vocabulary within each individual child, young person or adult. So the therapeutic approaches to behaviour was saying that actually us expecting children in reception and nursery to be able to say, I feel upset because, is just far too much for them before they're really understanding what those feelings feel like. To be able to verbalise that as well is another positive in itself. No explicit, pillar 2, no explicit or perceived grouping of feelings that suggest feelings are good or bad, right or wrong. So this is how we should be leading emotional literacy. Pillar 3, adults should explore feelings with children without ever labelling their feelings on their behalf, which we talked about last time. We do not label on our lanyards. Pillar 4, no unnecessary or formulaic use of symbols or abstract concepts to replace the growth of vocabulary. So don't replace it with a system. Let's just try and use language. We're just literally skimming over this, aren't we?
We are.
So what Ben was saying about COVID, they were saying that if you think about our reception children that are 4 years old, they were 2 when we had COVID. So they haven't missed an educational experience, but they were only having interactions with their immediate family, no secondary family members. And apparently, secondary interactions are what provide you self-esteem. So I guess your own parents saying, oh, you're good at, oh, well done, or you're right, yeah, but you're not good at that. So that's also part of the emotional literacy. It's affected not only them being able to express themselves, but also how they feel about themselves as well. So it's really not going well. Well, the impact of COVID for a while, yeah.
So just a little bit of information for you in terms of school exclusions, just so you know, we have no exclusions in our school. Important you know that. Steps approach or therapeutic thinking approach was to try and limit the amount of school exclusions every year. Every day, 40 pupils are permanently excluded from school. Just as an extra stat, every day an additional 2,000 per day receive a fixed term exclusion from school, and that's the most disadvantaged children who are disproportionately punished by the system. So that's why these children are key in terms of knowing who they are while we track them really carefully. Very, very important. So children's mental health, we know that mental health is not a primary area of need in our school currently.
In terms of, yeah, the areas of need, social, emotional, mental health, for 2 children, that's their primary area, part of our 24.
Yes, so our needs for our children are with children with autism, some of them who are waiting for confirmation of diagnosis, communication and interactions in this area, which we're providing most support with. So that's our area of focus for the moment. Just a quick generalisation as to what we're focusing on. And we do a lot here for children's mental health. We've also applied for the mental health grant, which comes from the government, and that's where we'll have a mental health lead within the school. We're doing lots of different activities throughout. So at the moment, the process is looking at which package is suitable for us. So every school is entitled to a grant, and we deliver mental health sessions for parents, for children, and look at the package in terms of what's beneficial for our school and our children.
Right, so this is just going over the main principles again of why we do what we do. So therapeutic thinking, that used to be called steps. Approach to behaviour, that prioritises the pro social feelings of everyone within the dynamic. So the dynamics we found to our school. And the right can just say the school. Pro-social, so we know what they are, so we talk about them all the time. They're positive, they're helpful, they're intended to promote social acceptance and friendships and that sort of thing. They're characterised by concern for rights, feelings and welfare of others, and its behaviour which benefits other people or society. And antisocial is the opposite. Causes harm to an individual, community, the environment, likely to cause injury, harassment, alarm or distress, behaviour that violates the rights of others.
And often the antisocial behaviours are the ones that are the incidents that are either under-described or over-described. So, for example, an over-describing phrase would be wreck the classroom or destroy the learning of other children, where a more accurate description is a child, whilst angry, has pulled over a small bookcase containing 20 books, 10 fell out, and one of us will tear on the cover. And then that seems a bit more wordy, but actually gives you a bit more context as to what actually happened. Also trying to take away fact and opinion. So you could say, in terms of when you're writing your CPOMs, you're not saying this, you've got to be very careful with your word choices and saying, because it could come across quite opinionated with the word selection. Does that make sense? It's being very descriptive as to what happened. Try and think about what happened before, because then we're trying to think about that cycle again. Actually, if you think about what happened before, where were they? What were they doing? What happened afterwards? Then it gives you a bit more of a succinct criteria as to really thinking about what could that trigger be, what could help them. So challenging behaviours are behaviours that challenge. We talk about a range of behaviour with severe learning disabilities, and they may display their needs when they're not being met. This is really, really important to make sure that we're thinking about how to recognise challenging behaviour, how they're being challenged, and who is challenging. So knowing your class really, really well, which I think is a good time to do this steps process now, because you know your children really well. Well, over halfway through the year, so it's important to just think about where they are, where they fit in terms of, are they challenging you in terms of what they're doing? What is their unmet need, really? So what is that behaviour that challenges? Is it aggression? Are they hitting? Are they causing themselves self-injury, head banging, putting their hand on their head? Is it destruction or throwing things? Is it sexual inappropriate behaviour, such as undressing? Obviously, that doesn't apply to us here, masturbating in public areas, but it could be something to look out for. We're not saying it could happen here, we're saying it does happen here. That's the process that we're taking. Even though we can convincingly say it doesn't, we are saying it does happen here. That's the wording that we have to say, because that's telling us that it's on our mind, it's on the forefront, we're looking for it, and we're aware of it. Does that make sense? It's not to frighten anybody, but we have to have that thinking. going forward, because that's what Ofsted are looking for. So just a definition between difficult and dangerous behaviour. I think we're quite clear on this. So it's difficult behaviour is antisocial, but not dangerous. Dangerous is an imminent result of injury to self or others. It could come out in terms of racial abuse, damage to property, or be considered criminal if the person was of age of criminal responsibility. So would they be, in terms of being processed by police, if they showed that behaviour, if they're at the appropriate age of 18?
But the racist abuse is just if the person's the age of criminal responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not our age group.
No.
That's would be classed as difficult behaviour. I think we see problems with the made with our DSPLs. So unsocial is different to antisocial. Not seeking to associate with others, but not to the detriment of self or others. Not choosing to behave sociably in the company of others, but not to the detriment of self or others. Not doing as instructed or dictated, but not to the detriment of self or others. These are those children on that inclusion diagram. We looked at the circles on the outside.
Yeah, dynamics group. So understanding discipline. So you've got external discipline, which is authoritarian controlling behaviour, using threat and bribery, often imposed by adults with the intention of controlling the behaviour where the child has no investment. Not beneficial to anybody because it could be there and then, it could be immediate, but actually you're not teaching them anything. They're just going to get something out of it very quickly, and it makes it easy for you because it's a quick fix. We really want to develop that internal discipline. So the children are understanding, actually, when I make this choice, the outcome is going to be much better, and then you also have better outcomes as well from their behaviour. They've learned from that process.
It shouldn't be different for different adults
No.
that ask them. It should be the same. Whatever adult in the school asks them, they should behave in the same way as if it was their class teacher.
Yeah. I think that's sometimes difficult, because especially like if you're an LSA, you're in different areas of the school, you see things that go on at lunchtime. And I think that's also important for us as class teachers. If a particular child in your class is a bit of a tricky morning, I think it's really important that we make sure we pass it on to the LSAs so they know what to look out for, because then we can then look out for those particular children. We know who our focus children are going to be out there anyway. But I think it's also just bearing in mind who those children are and passing that information on, because it could really help us out in terms of looking for trigger points as well. Bribery and rewards. We don't bribe. I don't bribe in terms of things just to get people to try and get them to motivate them, control what we want them to do. Rewards, in terms of extrinsic rewards, we don't really do that, but we are going to be looking at using team points. I'd like to introduce that after the Easter break. So the idea is that we're going to have a focus each week in terms of thinking manners wise and using that for the golden rules as well. So on Tuesday, we spoke to the children about using manners, being polite, saying please and saying thank yous, but actually being very clear and picking them up on it. So actually, I'm having a conversation with you and you're ignoring me. That's not okay. You know, we're trying to interact with our children. We're trying to get them ready to speak to adults. I think it's important that we do pull them up and say, oh, you could have had that door open. Make sure you do that for adults as well as children. We model those behaviours, so we should expect that as well. So when children are given something, encourage them to say thank you, encourage them to please. It's what we expect them to be able to do.
Do that at lunchtime.
Absolutely, yeah. It costs nothing.
I go to the gate when they come down. We'll
Yeah.
get together and go, open gate,
Yeah.
open gate.
But we do over the top of it. Yeah, exactly. To say to them, I just said hello to you. It's polite to say hello back to me. That's what you expect to happen. That's what happens in daily life. It's important. I think that sets the children up in the right way. And also it's expectation from everybody. It comes from all of us to be consistent with that approach. So we are going to be doing team points. It should be really simple. 4 colour teams of each class, 4 pots, 4 sets of colour counters, and we'll have a different focus each week that we're going to focus on. I think it'd be quite nice in terms of, especially if our children are young. We know we were going to come away from extrinsic rewards. Actually, they are very young. I think maybe an extrinsic reward is a little carrot, especially if we're looking for those polite manners and looking for those golden rules. It's those children who regularly show golden rules. They're easy to miss. This is the children you're focusing on that don't show the golden rules. They take up most of the time. So you want to make sure that you're noticing them and they feel it. But I'll deliver that in assembly as well, so they will know it and go into it. Okay, so language. We're looking at positive phrasing, making sure that we're pro-social, looking for those pro-social behaviours, encouraging children who are showing the best behaviours and those pro-social behaviours, and trying to look for those good examples. So I really like the way you're sitting up smartly, using your pencil and doing your best handwriting. Hopefully that domino effect will happen on everybody else. This is quite important, I think, in terms of coming away from saying the word no, coming away from saying the word no and don't. Stand next to me, put the pen on the table, walk in the corridor, walk with me to the library, stay seated in your chair. There's no negative connotations to that. You're instructing them, but you're actually not saying please, not asking them, you're telling them this is what we're doing. Because if you're saying please, you're essentially begging them to do it. And that's not what you want them to do. You're expecting it to happen, this is what we're doing. Very short, very clear, not over wordy. And we all keep to that. That should, the consistency will come through. But I also think we're perfectly right. I know, but that's the thing. And it goes against what I've just said. Completely goes against it. But it's an expectation, especially for those children who are showing no challenging behaviours. Always. Yeah. Stand next to me. Thank you. So you like you say, it's an expectation. Yeah, absolutely. Giving the children a limited choice. Where should we talk? Here or in the library? 2 options. I'm making a drink, orange or lemon. Are you going to sit on your own or with the group? Are you starting your work with the words or with a picture? Very limited choice. Don't overword it. Give them some very clear choices. Make it clear. Disempowering the behaviour. You can listen to me from there. So when someone's under the table, often, I'm never going to forget this. When I first came here, there was a child in here who I challenged because they didn't look like they were listening. And was out on the playground, and I said, "Oh, just make sure you're listening." And he turned around and said to me, "I may not look like I'm listening, but I am."
I knew what that was.
You know who that was, because I was out in your car. Yeah, but it's interesting because actually you don't want to optionalise that behaviour. If someone's underneath the table, you don't want to be the focus on that particular child. Fine, you can listen from there and you carry on doing what you're doing, because your job is to be with the rest of those children who are with you. That's the main focus. They're with you, they're listening, they're on board. You want to encourage that.
You wouldn't ask them to come and sit back.
Depending on who it is. They're there for a reason. There's a reason why they're there. And in the middle of your lesson, you don't want to have to stop. You're in the flow, you're in the full flow, delivering your maths or whatever lesson you're delivering. You don't want to have to stop.
Then the others might you allowing it, like
Yeah.
you allowing it, not that child choosing to do it. Even though it is that child choosing to do it.
Then say if the others want to listen from there, I'll definitely have some that can go under the table because the others are under the table. I'll have them all under the table.
Everyone will be listening there for their
Right, so I
rating.
go to the table, the table, you
I think that's a good point.
I might use it as well.
That's a good point. But most of the children in your classes are following what you do. It may not feel like that, but from an outside, if I go into a class and I sit and watch, you can see those children engaged in what's going on. I think sometimes when you're teaching, you're conscious and those children aren't doing the right things. You're focusing your attention on them, but they are with you. They are with you.
If they're like, if they are like, it's going to happen, they're only everyone's friends.
Yep.
We may not have conversations with the other children probably.
If I'm honest, I would still challenge it. I would. If I'm in the middle of teaching, I said, out. Simple. If it works, it works. You think, make sure, please work. It doesn't always, it doesn't. So then it's like, what do we do next? So you think, you're looking for those people who are making those right choices, and the whole idea is that you're trying to concentrate on the rest that are with you. I know that's really difficult, and sometimes that does work, sometimes it doesn't. But you're all skilled with your classes, you know what works for particular children.
When you can't see those individuals, because we all ignore the situation, it's like, oh, I was not paying no attention. So you finally come back out and just like, I did try to say child yesterday to try and come back to count, my choice, probably my choice, and do it. So I think if they can't, they can't.
I've had like S in my class who happily say their pages, so I can type my phone and it's like, and then he smiles, and then we get out together and
Mm.
And
So you know who to pick, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And this is why it's important to do this now, because you have a clearer picture of who this is going to apply to and who it won't work with. So we follow the same protocol, we follow the pathway and say, actually, we give you 3 warnings, it hasn't worked, and then we go to the next step.
So what if you have 3? So it's a ripple effect. It's 3 individuals in our class, so if we yeah, one thing, yeah, those ones, what do you do? Because
I've done it before, what do you
so
think?
we have that in entrance at the moment. So potentially we can have 3 or 4 opting out. It's knowing your children, knowing who you can say, who you can appeal to, and that's been helpful. And I think what I found really hard is going with the majority, but that's what I've been learning a lot over the last few weeks, and I think that really works. But you can appeal to one or other to come out, and it's only going to be the minority who are saying, you're not going to have all 26. No,
Because they know. And this is the perfect slide. It's called riding the wave. You're riding the wave because you want to catch them getting it right. That's what you're trying to do. And when they do get it right, you've got to make sure you're on it. And obviously, again, it comes down to praise. It's those children who may not necessarily like praise. It was indirect praise.
So whichever one comes out and praise that one, and then the rest will follow it, be like, oh, what that means.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can compare like when they're chasing.
Yeah, and then it ends up one stack of table, that one stack table, one slide with E gone. Because E proper goes into a ball now, and honestly, many times you have to say, like, if I come back with him, like, it's gone. And it's these one taps. One tap.
And again, it's also making sure before you ride the wave, it's making sure it's actually not becoming difficult, it's moving on to dangerous. It's making that judgment call as well. Most of the time it will be difficult. It's difficult behavior rather than dangerous. Okay, so I won't talk too much about this because we know this. I think this is something just as a reminder for everybody. So de-escalation script, you say the child's script, you say the child's name. Like you see that something's happened. I'm here to help. Talk my listen, come with me. And the most important thing is we don't label the feelings because we're saying we assume they're feeling that particular way, but it may not be how they're feeling. So you can say, oh, you feel angry. It might not be anger, it might be frustration. And we're incorrectly labeling feelings and telling the children that's what it is, but it may not be that. So it's very important that we don't label. So we should all have them on the lanyards. Mine's fallen off. So if you need any more, you want to make some more. Just get them. Just let us know.
What about if they don't have emotional vocabulary?
This is an important thing. So when we talk about emotional literacy, this is why the zones of regulation is really important, and it's why it's important for us to refer to them and making sure they are aware of how we're feeling, and you give a bit more context to them.
So we could show them, take them over that, and then they.
Absolutely, absolutely. We were thinking about the zones actually, and thinking as the children progress from reception up to year 1 to year 2, maybe we should introduce a few more feelings and emotions so they're becoming more familiar with them.
I think you might need the zones everywhere.
We do.
So dining hall, playground, I know that they were painted, but in those situations, there's not necessarily anywhere to take them to try and say, you tell me.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be everywhere.
Agreed. So I'm working with a set of year 2 girls at the moment who are trying to develop a quiet area on the playground. So we're looking at designing that and what they would like and what they think would be a nice space for them to go to. So it's just a way of another area for children to go to outside. Because we've got the zones painted in the shed. No one's ever used them. It's just there for as a token gesture. So I think we need to look at that. 9 times out of 10, behaviour issues come from playground because it's free space. Hence why I'm taking a group of reception children every day, or as often as possible, just because it's a long time and they are left to their own devices. It's a free time, free space, lots of children, over heightened. So we bring them in because that time was a time to get them ready for the next part of their learning. So that's why that's happening. They're my busy bee group, just in case you're wondering, I'm holding 2 bees up when I go outside. Okay. So this is where we turn just very quickly go into the physical side of things, so you know how we do physical intervention. What we don't want to do is making sure we're putting anyone in danger, including you when we're doing this. and there's clear policy and guidance as to what we do. So we have a policy in place. What we don't want to do is the 3 components that are completely wrong and incorrect when we're doing any physical intervention. It's a negative impact on the process of breathing, pain as a direct result of the concept of technique, and a sense of violation. Okay, so we're really thinking about keeping ourselves safe as well as the children. They're difficult children in terms of height-wise. It makes it a little bit trickier. But again, in terms of they're not tall, they're not as strong, so it should be a little bit easier. This is the very, very, very last component. If we are at wit's end, we've got nothing else to help us out, we need to keep them safe. This is only if a child is not safe. They're in danger of putting themselves at risk and harm. This is when this happens. We don't do this for any other reason. If it's difficult, we don't move them, we don't touch them.
Do we not do it if they are seeing other children?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think people are great here in terms of getting in the way and stopping things from happening. I feel people feel less confident moving children. It's not a nice thing. It's not a nice experience for anyone to do it. I've had to do it a few times, but you need to do it with someone with you. Don't do it on your own, because again, if we have to do physical intervention, this has to go home to parents as well. We have to tell them we've done this, this is what we've done. This is a safe precaution, a safe way of doing it, covering you and making sure we're keeping the child safe at the right time. If you're in doubt, don't touch them. Just get someone else. Call for me, call for Faye. Karen, you're training this, aren't you? And we're going to have a go on this as well, man, just so we can just remind ourselves of the techniques and doing things in the right way. So this is the policy. This is where this is in. So in terms of our touch and reducing the need of restrictive physical intervention policy, this is where this information is kept. This is where it talks about lap sitting and physically separating the child from the parent and carrying. We don't do these unless there's a real need for them in terms of, and this has to be reported to myself or to Melissa, and then we put things in place to make sure that we have an intervention in place for those children. For this one, physically separating a child from a parent, I always say, get them across the threshold, you touch them down in the school, and then I can move them into the school. So I've had a couple of children for the breakfast club who've had that as well. I'm not touching them until they're in the school. So the parent will bring them in, drop them in we go, we lock the door, we're here. 9 times out of 10, they can be fine after that. But it's just giving you some different techniques to think about. Physically comforting the child could also put us at risk for that. And restraining. So we don't want to be restraining anybody. That's the most important thing, because it's putting us in danger and them in danger, and restricting breathing. So let's have a look. So this is, and there's an update. So it tells you also, we're going to look at a few examples of pictures, but also where we place our feet. There's a diagram as well, which should be a little more helpful where we place ourselves. So stance is really, really important. We want to maximize our balance. We want to protect our backs. Be aware of hip security and make sure your head area is safe away from children as well, and avoid any bending or twisting. Okay, so that's the most important part in terms of our stance. Very difficult, yeah, very, very difficult. It is, which is why it's important that you don't do it on your own. And to be honest, often the most common one that I use is the open mitts. So you have your arms around like this and you just guide them like that. And there are different challenges to that, which we'll talk about in a moment. So just keeping ourselves keeping us safe and our backs in a good space. Just feet set at least shoulder width apart, so then you're keeping your own balance, because it's sometimes difficult. They can be quick, they're small. It makes things a little bit more difficult. Soft knees, contact to the hip, head aware, body aligned, and no unnecessary twisting or bending. But I'm teaching you how to jump up on that. But it's just important tips just to keep us safe and make sure we're not injured. So this is the stance L shape. So again, you're just restricting their movement. So you're turning and they're turning at a 90-degree angle. Just keeping them at arm's length if they feel that they're becoming a danger towards you. Most unlikely to happen for us in here. But again, it's just keeping those soft knees, feet shoulder width apart, so you've got a nice solid base. Just where you place your feet. So they'll be at a slightly different angle. You're just keeping yourself at arm's length in that safe area. So this is an A shape, a nice wide stance, balance and security. I don't really like this one. I think it's too restrictive. I've never used one. It's too difficult. So he's got open mitt. He's actually open mitten at the back like that. And I think she's got her arms around the back. Not the best one. So hip tip, really good in terms of reassuring someone and giving them like a helping hand. Again, we're looking at those soft touch points. We're not grabbing, we're not gripping. We're keeping our arms nice and open. Flat palms on body parts as well, which is really, really important. And you may need to kneel if it's a slightly difficult height. But hip to hip just reduces the minimum movement as well. Again, I've not used that one. I've used the next one with someone else, which is quite an important one. So in terms of this one, what you need to do when you're working together with someone, you're moving together at the same time. You don't stop. One of you stops and one of you goes. You have to go. Come on, we're going. What else is the child will push back. You come back. What's going to happen? They're going to fall on the floor. Fall on the floor. You leave them. That's hard. Yeah. And they go loose. Yeah. But when you're doing this, you have to be very, very clear where you're going to. Where's your destination? Know where you're going, know the route you're going to. And often it's in a heightened time. So you can call, I need someone to come with me quickly to move this child. You're thinking, right, where am I going? Which way am I going to go? You're not thinking like that, but you talk to the child. You come on, off the library, we're going, off we go, go. No time to think. Constant moves, walking at speed. Obviously in a safe space, but they're like that because they're trying to keep up with you. But because they're concentrating on that, they're not thinking about other things. They're not about pushing back. They can't run in there because you're there. It's quite a nice one. So you have one arm either side. Your hand is flat here, an arm on the other side here. So it's again, smooth part of your hand, open palm, like this, moving. Yeah? That makes sense? Do you want to have a go?
Just as you do the little dance again.
I think it's important. What we don't want to do is, want to see people moving around with you. This is something that should hardly happen if it ever happens at all. Ever. And that's like I said, if in doubt, don't touch them. Speak to us or radio cross.
We have a few nursery children running this reception level, and it's meant to be sort of an outbound area for a nursery. They don't always understand that because of their So we do have to go in there and try and stop them getting into reception floor or to try and get them to leave toys and come back over. So we do have to do a lot of that, guiding them. But it's not from like a behaviour point of view. It's more from like an out of bounds.
Yeah, I think especially because they are a lot younger and we're trying to establish boundaries. We just have to be very mindful that they're not in any danger, they're not being unsafe. No. You're just trying to come on over this way, just a gentle hand, gentle guide, but you'd never grab, you just open hand, open palm, just moving. They are, which is why you have to move quick. You have to move quick. Yeah. But again, we know those children. We know who those children are going to be. So I think what we could do is a bit more work in terms of what we could try and do to limit that from happening. So maybe we have a little conversation about that. It's a little bit different, isn't it? Because what we're saying is it's difficult because it's not dangerous and we're not being unsafe. It's just inconvenient. It's inconvenient.
It's not a behavioural thing. They're not trying to be tricky. They're not trying to be defiant. They're not trying. They're just curious. They just want to. They want to go and have fun. It's an environment thing. And it's not their fault. And nobody is upset or annoyed or cross with them. It's just you're trying to guide them back to where they need to be. Like they are incredibly fast, and they're just snatching toys, and you're trying to do that. So it just, I think, if anybody sees us doing that, they might think, oh my word, but you're trying to.
Yeah, I think it's important to have those conversations, especially in terms of staff ratios when you're outside as well. It's making sure that the other staff will know that they're there. Worst case scenario, they're going to be in the reception area and they're going to be playing with the toys. That's the worst case scenario. As long as they're not putting anyone in danger, not being unsafe. Sorry? They should go to the forest, yeah, they could. But they can't go anywhere.
They
Yeah.
can, if their doors open,
Yep.
they can access the whole
Yep.
school.
Offer your hand, give them 2 fingers. Go, come on, let's go. You just expect that to happen. Hopefully that will work. But, it's not. Yeah. Some children get it, some children don't understand that invisible boundary, do they?
I'm very aware of that.
Yeah. It's a good question. Okay. So this is an example of just getting the level in terms of penguin shape. Arms by the side again, open palms, nice and close, nice and tight. I still have another one. Come on, something. But again, it's communicating intention. This is what we're doing. I'm here to help. Try and use that de-escalation script as well at the same time. Being very clear where we are going, so then they know exactly what's going to be going, what's going to happen. Like a running commentary. So you're trying to de-escalate at the same time, but at the time, the moment you're in, thinking, right, we need to get to the library. We're going, or wherever safe space it's going to be.
Quite often they're moving down. And my sort of understanding, if you're trying to remove them somewhere, obviously I think that's moved down. Is there a situation where you would just want them to stand with you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe would.
Yep, that's where you can put you can do this one. Supporting arm. Give a supporting arm if you want to.
I'm trying to think about a situation when you would use that. Would you not get everybody else out and have one child stand with you? Everybody else go out. Second class.
Maybe sometimes you'll be it might be that you go down lower,
Yeah.
it might go down.
She wants to empower you as well, rather than, that's what it comes in. It's empowering you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You've got to think actually, what's the quickest way and the safest way? What would be the best way? Is it to get this child out or get the whole class out? What's the safest route? Sometimes it's easy to get all the rest of the 29 out rather than that one child. If that's the case, do it. But have radios. Okay, so open mitts, closed mitts. Open mitts is this one, closed mitts is put your arm down here, so you like a cupping shape around the shoulder, so not on the bony parts or the bit, and you're not pulling where the joints are. You're on the main fleshy parts of the body, and just making sure your fingers and your thumb are together. That's the most important part. Once you got that, you're pressing your thumb, high possibility you're going to leave a mark in the middle. Don't be scared by this. I know this is like it's not. I don't really want to end with this either, because I don't want you thinking this is what we have to do. You shouldn't have to do this. This is the last case, is all. Offering a supportive arm. Again, making yourself keep them nice and tight. Communicate your intention, which is also important. And draw their elbow in for extra security. So you're protecting yourself from that point, because it could be someone who's going to try and elbow. Again, most likely going to be someone a little bit older than what we do have here. Supportive hugs. This is the hardest one, I think, for staff, because especially if our younger children, they want to come up, and especially if they just want someone to give them a hug. And the amount of times you had their head in towards you and think, oh, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult, but you want to be there, so we offer them a supportive hug, which doesn't look the same. Of course it doesn't, but we're trying to keep everyone safe. You've got to be careful, unfortunately, that's what the world's coming to. So it's keeping everyone in the right place. Again, we're thinking about stance, most likely be kneeling down, and just being that person to go to. They've obviously come to you for a reason, because they feel safe, and that's enough. That's enough. Just someone a little bit taller, nice supportive hug. Again, fleshy parts of the body, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, and communicating, always talking through. So then the child isn't hearing it, it's everyone else that's hearing it as well around. There we go. Making sure our fingers and our thumb are together. Okay, open them. So thumb away from fingers. So when you're going from this point, you're going underneath the arm from here, being underneath there, just guiding through. Then all you're doing is touching the body with your L shape of your fingers. And then just guiding them through. So again, for this supported L, you're just keeping yourself in a safe, protected space. So you're working at a 90-degree angle, and you communicate what you're doing around wherever you need to go to. Most likely, what's going to happen from there is that they're going to run off because you're not hot stopping them from going anywhere. They run. If you're guiding them away from a particular unsafe space, you've done the right thing by moving them away from the area. There we go. So just underneath the elbow, just above the elbow there. And talking about the de-escalation script as well, just remind them that you're there to keep them safe. That's just a paired example of an open mitt. Again, arms up where it's a safe area for you. And if they fall, just go back with them, because they'll automatically try and pull themselves back up. Okay. I'm going to go too heavy, let's just give you an idea. That's it. It's okay? Again, don't worry too much about the physical. If in doubt, don't touch them and call for help. What I'll do is make sure that we've got everyone's certificate organised. So I send off now information to all the STEPS tutors, and they send out certificates so you have the training today. If there's anything you're not sure about, this has been recorded. We can go back over it just as a reminder of people on the half. Does anyone have any questions?
Going back to what we said earlier, later.
Yep.
So you used to have centre in the classroom, is that just gone? Was that in the quite detailed version?
Our whole idea of the inclusive approach is to try and keep the children in your classroom. Yeah. And I think
if they are disrupting the learning of others, are they calling someone else from the facility?
Yeah, I think also, there's going to be times where you're going to be at your wit's end. You've tried everything. As long as you've followed the correct procedures and you've given a reminder, they've had their thinking time, and they're still causing you issues, depending on who that is. And we've spoken about this before, haven't we? Yep. So the downfall of that is if that child is then moved out of your class and goes to another class, they could cause the same issues in a different class, and that's not helpful to 60 children rather than 30. So ideally, we'll keep them in and then you call for help if you need help. Yep.
And it's 10 o'clock, and there's still like this until 3 o'clock. I know you went to meet with their parents, but you're not going to meet with their parents. So like in that time between 10 and 3, are they just going to keep having 5 minutes thinking time? Like what is the consequences?
If they're still showing the same behaviours.
5 minutes thinking time, like what if they're still continuing? What next?
So then you'd call for myself or Faye to come in, or Karen. Karen first.
Yeah, can I just say about that as well? Because a lot of people I think have been listening to you guys. You know, that's why I wear the walkie-talkie. That's what I'm here for. And I'm probably I'm really busy and rushing around, except for Wednesday morning when I'm doing my therapy work. The rest of the time, I'm walking to come up with that.
On a Friday.
Oh, yeah.
I said the bats of you into the sky. Yeah, so first of all, like, it's a good question. Actually, yeah.
Because sometimes it's very low level as well. It's just like they're talking over you.
It can be, yeah.
They're whispering, so it feels quite extreme to go to calling someone else.
Well, what we don't want to do is disempower you. We don't want them to then just make the right choice because someone else said them to do. We don't want that to happen. We want them to do that because you've asked them to do that.
And sometimes calling somebody else doesn't work because I'm like a safe person or something.
Yep.
And then somebody else, I don't feel like that works for all children to have somebody else do that work.
So that person can then take your class where you have spent some time with that child.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
What colour are they?
Team colours, so
They are those
yeah.
colours.
The chewing thing is anti-sequence. The sequencing,
it could be hard to make a record of everything that they've done in one day. And then, so when you are offering, say on sequence, we say something is happening and then we offer the action. I wouldn't want to upload just every incident putting something in their mouth. So what could that look like for the people?
So someone who's chewing things, eating it.
You give them something to help them and put it in their mouth. If they're ripping and putting it out and chewing it.
That's essentially. Yeah, that's definitely for essentially. I just think, yeah, as long as it's not dangerous, where it's like frictions and things like that. Actually, we won't have anything that's dangerous in our classrooms anyway. And I think that's just thinking about also health and safety wise, making sure, especially for those particular children who are quite light-fingered and put things in their mouths, making sure things are put away, medication in particular, keep it safely put away, so then that doesn't happen. I think, 9 times out of 10 it'll be paper anyway. And if it's Prickstick, good luck with Prickstick if you're trying it now. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, chewing pencils. We can deal with that when we're dealing with touching things like this.
Can I say about the talk?
Yes.
We know, obviously we're in the office, we can hear the chat or not the chat. I think it's not calls for help and you hear it and think, well, I'll go. Can you answer? Just let reply.
Yeah.
So the person that's asking for help knows that someone's coming and they have to keep asking and expressing that.
Yeah.
And then other people might think, should I go or should I not go? And so that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
I know you're keen to get there.
I think sometimes it was funny the other day when Karen was asked. I thought she's in today. Karen's in today. Yeah, she'll be there. And then she didn't respond. I thought she's somewhere else. So then I ran over and I hadn't communicated that. So yeah, that's definitely something I'm trying to think.
It's just when we think of on the office.
You just assume because they're in.
Someone going, is someone going,
Yeah.
is someone going.
Yeah.
Then we kind of feel maybe you should.
Which is fine, and which is
Yeah.
fine.
Great.
We would.
Yeah.
Which is why if someone doesn't answer, we do.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. Right, thank you all. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much. I'm just going to drop this. Thanks, everybody.